All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, if you hadn't guessed already from the pattern that has been the last couple of weeks, we have a new face. And this is actually a new face that is brand new to me because Will and I have actually only ever spoken over Twitter. So, everyone, welcome the amazing William SRD.
Hello, good to meet everybody, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So if anyone's not familiar with you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am, as Jody said, I am William SRD. I make TTRPG video essays of various sorts on my channel. Mostly I focus on like the history of role-playing games, and I also focus a lot on like RPG media. So I'm not usually in the kind of gameplay department, so this will be fun to jump back in there for a while.
The reason we kind of came into each other's circles, he made this really awesome video a few months ago at least now. Has it been like 6 months? Almost a year now, maybe?
No, not almost a year, because I haven't been on YouTube for a full year. I think it was in November, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, you sweet summer child. You're still a baby YouTuber.
I am still just a baby YouTuber.
Wow.
It's been quite the year.
I've only been doing it for
I think it's a year in June.
Still, he made a really brilliant video called, I think it's The Critter's Guide to D&D YouTube or something akin to that. And the only real problem with it is it didn't have me. And I've actually shown up.
A valid complaint.
On a Critical Role stream years and years and years ago, and I made them cry. So there. And then he made another one, and he put me in it, and I realized there are so many amazing D&D YouTubers out there.
Oh, there are. I met so many people through that video, and I'm in contact with so many people now just from that. It was a really cool way to meet the whole community. I'm still tempted to do a part 3 because I met like enough people just through there who I absolutely love just through that video that absolutely deserve a slot in another Critter's Guide. So at some point when I'm out of content, I'll make another one of those.
And that just again, because your content is so different from the stuff that I did to do on here, I like to highlight some of the cool stuff. Like you have like historical role-playing game things. Like a lot of people are aware they found D20s in like Egyptian tombs and that, but you found other kind of role-playing games and other things that have existed in history for centuries.
I've found role-playing-esque games. They're not super similar to modern role-playing games, but they're definitely games where you are role-playing as a character for fun, not as a theater game. I found a fair number of those throughout history. The earliest one I was able to find a really good accounting for is 800 years old. It's from Norman, England, and it's essentially it's almost like a medieval truth or dare. Like it was a very raunchy kind of game. And the whole thing was that you're given fortunes, and that fortune will define how your character is going to act for the day. And then it's a pretty unstructured game, as you and everybody else at the party all have your fortunes on how you're supposed to act and how your story's supposed to go. And then you just kind of bounce off of each other to tell this impromptu story. It was a very cool game. It's called Ragman Roll.
That is super cool. It definitely reminds me of, I can't remember what it's called now. It's, they compare it to a Coen Brothers movie, Fiasco.
Yes, I love Fiasco. Yeah.
Yes, it feels like. So what you're actually saying is Gary Gygax just stole the idea of RPGs, from these.
Oh, he definitely merged it with wargaming for sure, but it was a pre-existing genre.
Which is super cool. Today, we are going to be continuing along the path of the Sorcerer, and something that is a little bit unique as far as this series has been going. The two people that I've had on previously are both 5th edition DMs with a decent amount of experience playing and running 5e. Will, on the other hand, you are a little bit more familiar with Pathfinder than 5th edition D&D, correct?
Yeah, I've played a ton of systems over the years. I've been playing different games since I was like 12, so I've jumped between editions and all that stuff, but I've never really touched 5e. I'm more of a Pathfinder guy at the moment, but I'm pretty used to jumping in new systems. I have read the 5th edition rulebook, so I'm familiar enough. So I'm coming at all of this from more of like a I'm gonna have a bit of a hard time, I guess, comparing things between 5th edition classes, but I'm fully equipped on the sort of base level design stuff.
Well, and when you think of homebrewing and things like that, when you look at like one of the subclasses we're definitely going to talk about is the Divine Soul Sorcerer, which is a 5th edition version of the Favored Soul, which was its own class in 3rd edition. I think they've got multiple flavors of Favored Soul in Pathfinder, right?
I remember coming across it. I don't know too much about sorcerer subclasses in Pathfinder. Actually, I've not played too much with it.
But it's basically I can't think of the word, an intrinsic spellcaster that is divine based instead of arcane based, effectively. Yeah. And so when we're looking at homebrewing and we're looking for new subclasses and things like that, a really good place to start is either earlier editions of D&D or different role-playing games. You're like, you know what, that would be super cool if we had like a D&D version of that. And so
the companies are fully constrained by copyright, but as homebrewers, you can take whatever you want.
Oh yeah. And you know, again, we've seen taking the things like the Blood Hunter, for example. There is one subclass of the Blood Hunter that is obviously a Witcher. I know it's a Witcher. You know it's a Witcher. We all know it's a Witcher. But by using different terms and things like that, we have a really cool Blood Hunter subclass that you could basically create a Geralt style character, and they don't have to worry about copyright.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, take inspiration from everywhere. And so I'm hoping we'll have some pretty cool conversations.
Yeah, I think so.
So, first things first, just a reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important, not only to let me know that you like me, you really, really like me, but also to get this video seen by other people. The more interactions there are, the more chance that YouTube will send it out. So please do that.
It's true. And for your viewers, just so you know, if you hit like on the video, that probably means about 5 to 10 more people see it in YouTube. So it does help a lot.
I had no idea there was a numeric. I didn't know that was a thing. That is super cool.
That's not that. I don't have specific data on that, but that's just what I've noticed is that when someone hits like, suddenly I get like 10 more impressions on a video. So it's roughly that ratio as far as I can tell. So it is a big help.
So yes, listen to William SRD, who's significantly better at this than I am. So, quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition D&D, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, all classes have these things that we call defining features. A defining feature is either something unique to the class, or maybe it's not something that's unique, but it's something the class gets earlier or can use in a different way than any other class. And in order for something to be a defining feature, it has to show up within the first 2 levels. The reason for this, since we do have someone who's a little bit newer with 5th edition, is earlier editions of D&D, one of the big problems you had with low-level characters is they all felt the same to play. A first-level paladin, a first-level fighter, and a first-level barbarian were the same character.
Yeah, it took a long time for class divergence to happen.
So 5th edition actually took 4th edition was the first one to really go, okay, we're going to make everything play very differently. And 5th edition reined in some of the chaos that 4th edition was. And this defining features aspect is what kind of survived, and it works pretty well. So, what are the defining features of the Sorcerer? Someone that's not here asks. Let me tell you. The Sorcerer gets 3 features within the first 2 levels. The first one they get is spellcasting. If you watched my previous video on this, I actually go into details about the defining features and talk a lot about them. We're not going to do that here because I've done it already. But the unique thing about spellcasting is, according to the definition I just gave, spellcasting isn't a defining feature for the Sorcerer because the spellcasting they have is identical word for word to bardic spellcasting. Bards and sorcerers have the exact same text. So you can't really call it a defining feature. However, the Sorcerer is a spellcaster. And it has to be something that is definitive of it because being a full spellcaster in 5th edition D&D means most of the time your action or your bonus action, sometimes both, are going to be taken up by casting a spell. So the way the Sorcerer gets around that is the second thing they get at first level is called their Sorceress Origin. That's their subclass. Because it shows up in the first level, your subclass, a lot of times your Sorcerer will introduce a defining feature, and a lot of times it will somehow modify the spellcasting to turn it into something unique. Which is really interesting, and for homebrewers means you can create some very, very different subclasses to the point where if you have 2 sorcerers, level 1 sorcerers in the same party, they're going to play differently compared to if you have 2 fighters in the same party. They're not going to make huge changes until you get closer to level 3, and especially once you hit level 4 and they start getting their billions of feats that they get to customize themselves with. So it makes the Sorcerer really fun to homebrew for, but it also means you really need to understand these defining features well, or else you're going to create a subclass that fights against itself. So we will talk about Sorcerer's Origins. I'll pick a couple out to kind of focus on to just show kind of the different things that can happen in a second. But the final defining feature is the thing that everybody thinks about when they talk about 5th edition Sorcerers, which is Font of Magic. They get a new limited resource called Sorcery Points. They have the same number of Sorcery Points as they do Sorcerer levels. And at 2nd level, they can use Sorcery Points to create spell slots and spell slots to create Sorcery Points using a thing called flexible casting. What that means is sorcerers can cast more of the same level of spell than any other class in the game. They can cast like 6 level 2 spells where every other class in the game is limited to 4, other than using Arcane Recovery for wizards. At 3rd level, they get a modification to it where they get metamagic options, which are not a new thing to 5th edition. Metamagic has existed since 3rd edition, I know for certain. I don't know if it showed up in 2nd.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, neither am I. But 3rd edition, metamagic was done using feats. You would take a metamagic feat, and then when you prepared your spells in the morning, you could prepare like a magic missile with a metamagic feat, and it would shift it into a higher spell slot in order.
Yeah, and I gotta say that the 5th edition sorceress points, I forget what they're called. We were just talking about them. I find they're really like a way better implementation of metamagic than any other edition I've played, because everything else it kind of feels like it feels like a punishment almost, where, oh yeah, I want my mage armor to last longer, so now I have to give up a higher level spell to do it. Whereas with the sorceress points, it's like this flexible pool of stuff, and you can metamagic as needed, and you don't feel like you're missing out on other things because you have this pool of flexibility, really.
Well, and it's one of the nice things about, if we go into a slightly wider discussion, one of the nice things about class-based versus skill-based RPGs is in a class-based RPG, if you put something and limit it to a single class, like metamagic is here, you can get a little bit more creative, and you can make it a little bit more powerful because multi-classing rules and things like that will provide limits. Whereas, like the 3rd edition, and I think there's metamagic options in Pathfinder too, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it works the same way as third edition. Yeah.
With those, literally, I think the only limitation to taking a metamagic feat is you have to be able to cast spells.
Yeah.
So any spellcasting class, including like higher level paladins and things like that, can theoretically get a metamagic feat as long as they have a high enough spell slot to be able to use the upgraded version. So
Yeah.
with this, you limit it to one class and allows you to do more fun things with it. And it's one of the things I like about class-based RPGs is you can create some really interesting, fun things because you don't have to worry about, abilities overlapping with each other by, people just taking the smorgasbord of, I'll do this and this and this and this and this, that sometimes happens in skill-based RPGs.
Absolutely, and I think it's quite. I mean, not to go too far off topic here,
Go for it,
I find it quite fascinating the design philosophy difference because I'm playing Pathfinder Second Edition right now, which advances that 3.5 base in a very different direction. And they went the opposite
right there.
Yes. So they've got almost like meta magic. They went the opposite way, where the meta magic is so non-class based that most spells have their own built-in meta magic just in the spell, like magic missile. As we know from every edition, shoots more missiles the higher level you get. In second edition, that's like a built-in meta magic thing that every level you heighten the spell, it casts an extra missile. And that's like a built-in thing. You don't need a meta magic feat or anything to do that. The spell just has its automatic heightening effect in it. So I just think it's interesting to go the opposite way, where there's making it so universal that it's built right into the spell, versus baking it so heavily into the class that that's kind of like the one way you get it. It's just very interesting to see the difference.
Yeah, and that idea of heightening spells is inherent in 5th edition spellcasting because you can most spells you can upcast for additional things like magic missile. You can cast it second level, and for each additional level after the first, you add another magic missile to it.
Okay, so it works the same way then.
So I believe when I did a little bit of a study of second edition where I compared second edition Pathfinder monks to 5th edition monks just to see the kind of similarities into the differences, and you can really see a strong 5th edition influence in Pathfinder second edition. Like you can see certain things that are like, okay, obviously this was inspired by that, and then you can also see them kind of doubling down on some of the things that people really favored in Pathfinder. Like there's significantly more complexity in second edition than there was in first edition. In first edition, which I've gone on tirades about the idea of complexity for complexity's sake tends to be a detriment. But it's something that their player base, or at least the loudest members of their player base, really liked, and so that's what they did. And now they have like 3 or 4 different types of feats, and you technically don't have subclasses in it because you can create your own subclasses by picking different feats, and they have feat trees and
types, and
it's nuts.
It's so customizable. That's what I love about it. But I actually really think that Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons, and this is going to make edition snobs very angry. But I think the two are a very good influence on one another.
Yeah, I mean it, and this is something like a. We will get to sorcerers eventually, I promise, folks. But this is interesting conversation that is important. There'll be timestamps. Don't worry. I'm talking to the angry people that don't exist yet. But the idea, like people get mad that D&D in general is top of the heap and is doing so well and is actually breaking economic norms. To be perfectly honest, the idea of your core rulebook is always your best-selling book in any RPG ever. That's how it works. Core rulebook sells more copies than anything else, and then every additional supplement sells less and less and less until you finally get to a point where you release a new core rulebook or a new system, because the diminishing returns are not going to help you. 5th edition is the exact opposite. Each new supplement outsells the last supplement.
It's very strange.
And it, again, I have a degree in business management and marketing. This shouldn't happen. This isn't how economics works. And so people will get upset. It's like, well, there's so many other RPGs that are better in D&D. It's like, well, first of all, they're not better. They're different, which is good.
Yeah.
And
They've
second
each
of
got
all,
their design objectives.
the better D&D gets, the more of a pool of new players every other system will have. Like, I started tabletop role-playing with D&D 4th edition, actually, was my first tabletop edition. The evil 4th edition. But since getting into 4th edition and 5th edition and it becoming a huge part of my life, I now play tons of different... I collect systems. Like, I run an open legend game every other Wednesday.
Oh, cool.
Over December, I ran 4 brand new systems I'd never run before, just to try it. So the better and the more different systems are out there, the better for tabletop RPGs as a whole, and especially for homebrewing, because now you have so many different interesting ideas that can inspire your own homebrew stuff.
Well, and that's very much kind of how I got into a lot of this in the first place. Was so back in the day, my friend group and I started playing when we were like 12, and we had an older kid who introduced us to the games, but I don't think he actually had read the rule book or anything, and he was kind of just making it all up as he went along. He didn't have a book on him. We didn't have character sheets other than the stuff we made on scrap paper, and we were basically just making up systems and making up the game for a good 6 years, and for a good for like the second half of those 6 years that we were doing these pure homebrew games, we were now starting to become aware of the actual professional rule systems. So we had this whole thing because we lived in a small little countryside town. We didn't have access to any bookshops or anything that had D&D books in them. So we were just like going onto online news articles and all that stuff and just finding little scraps of the rules and just be like, okay, so there's this cool thing now called armor class and we have to introduce that to our game now. So I still, even now, I have this feeling every time I read a new rule book and a new system, I still feel like I'm getting away with something. Like I've just stolen a bunch of these rules now that will one day benefit me.
Oh, I adore that. That's so cool. It's one of the reasons I collect these different systems. By the way, Humble Bundle and Bundle of Holding are amazing.
I gotta look into those.
They both, a Humble Bundle every so often will have RPG. Like that's where I got all my Pathfinder stuff. Is I paid like $30 and I got every Pathfinder supplement ever.
Amazing.
Or I think I did it with 13th, like a bunch of different systems. I just bought the whole system for $30.
Right.
And then I just collect them all. But yeah, I'll read these things and I go, ooh, I could totally use it. Like Open Legend is the other one that I run a lot. And one of the things that I took directly from Open Legend is the idea that every roll matters. It's their kind of founding principle of the system, where you in D&D and in Pathfinder and most other ones, if someone, you're talking to an NPC, he's like, oh, he's obviously lying. I'm rolling an insight check. I am too. And that's just how it works. In Open Legend, they actively discourage it. They go, no, let one person do their roll, and then no matter what they roll, the story is going to move on. There's 3 different things that can happen. They can succeed with a twist, or they can fail, but it moves the story forward. And when you start bringing that to D&D, it massively changes the game without needing a single other rule. Just viewing that every time they roll the dice, you can do something. And sometimes it's as simple as, okay, well, they failed the check. They're trying to pick the lock. It could just be that, well, they fail to pick the lock and, oh, their lockpick breaks and now they can't.
Yeah.
They failed and now the story moves on. But it could be something like they succeed with a twist. They go, click. Oh, it opens up. Poison gas starts shooting out. They succeeded, but with a twist. So things like that really make it a lot more fun. And it's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have someone that is much more versed in non-D&D things talking about homebrew in D&D 5th edition, because I think that will provide a lot more interesting ideas.
Open.
So now that we've talked about everything but sorcerers for 25 minutes, let us dive into the actual subclasses that are not in the PHB. And since I've mentioned it already, let's talk about the Divine Soul. I mentioned before the Divine Soul is basically the 5th edition version of the Favored Soul, which is I can't remember if it was a prestige or just a base class in 3rd edition, but it's one of those. And basically what it was a sorcerer that was divine magic versus arcane magic. And in 3rd edition, that basically meant things like instead of having to prepare spells for spell slots like every other caster, sorcerers would just have known spells and spell slots, and they could just cast them at will using whatever spell slot they had. Favored souls would be able to do that with divine spells. In 5th edition, that's how all magic works, is you don't prepare spells into slots, you have prepared spells, and you have slots, and you cast them using slots. So they had to do some different things to make things still unique for the class. And so when they introduced the Divine Soul, they have a few things that tend to be really common when you start looking at sorcerer subclasses. At first level, when you choose it, you get 2 features. The first one's called Divine Magic. And basically what it says, when your spellcasting feature lets you learn or replace a sorcerer cantrip or spell of first level and higher, you can choose the new spell from the cleric spell list or the sorcerer spell list. So effectively, they have just doubled the number of spells a Divine Soul sorcerer can do. And as I mentioned before in my last video, the fact that one of the meta magic options you get is called Quicken Spell, which allows you to cast a spell as a bonus action. That means there are interactions with cantrips and spells that a sorcerer can have that a cleric can't. And due to just the meta magic in general, this massively changes how the sorcerer can play, giving them access to things like what's it called? Spiritual Weapon. Spiritual Weapon's a really common cleric spell. You summon it as a bonus action, it creates a little thing, and then it attacks, and then as a bonus action on every turn while the spell lasts, you can now just bop people with a magic weapon that flies around independent of you. Giving that to a sorcerer means now not only can they cast really powerful spells as their action, but as their bonus action, they now have an automatic bop you with magic thing.
Yeah, and I mean the concept. Even the concept alone of just because in previous editions, I mean, Pathfinder had very similar, where they had the Oracle, which I think we were talking about it earlier, and I couldn't remember what it was called in Pathfinder. Where the only difference was it was essentially the spontaneous casting divine caster, and even just that concept alone is like, yeah, that's worth a class. And once you get into those complexities of 5th edition, as you said, with now you've got these meta magic stuff that other classes don't get, well, then you get spell combos that are more than unique enough to be a very cool class on its own.
Mm-hmm. And so when you are homebrewing, again, a really common thing for most subclasses is you will give them an expanded spell list. This happens with most spellcasting classes. You go, by the way, you can also choose from these spells. So remember, if you are adding more spells to the sorcerer spell list, understand combinations can happen. Understand that the main balancing factor in 5th edition is concentration. Concentration spells, you can only have one concentration spell going at a time. So if you're going to be adding spells, understand which spells are concentration, which spells aren't. Like Spiritual Weapon, despite the fact that it lasts, is not a concentration spell. So adding that to any class, any spellcasting class, means they can cast Spiritual Weapon and call lightning, and every turn call a bolt of lightning down without using another spell slot and bop them with a magical hammer. And that only costs them 2 spell slots for an entire combat and kick a counter. So you really you need to understand what you're doing and be aware of the different combos, which is why Divine Magic is such a unique feature, because normally your expanded spell list is here's, half a dozen new spells, not here's an entire new spell list. Enjoy.
Yeah.
So be very careful if you go, I'm going to give you the Warlock spell list.
Yeah. There are always consequences.
So moving on. The other thing you get at first level for the Divine Soul is you get what's called Favored by the Gods. If you fail a saving throw or miss an attack roll, you can roll 2d4 and add it to the total, possibly changing the outcome. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So this is another, we talked about it with Wild Magic, being able to control a little bit of the RNG built into the system is always fun. And the different ways you can do it, the kind of overarching thing for 5th edition is the advantage-disadvantage system, which shows up a little bit in Pathfinder 2nd edition as well.
Yeah, at a few points. Yeah.
So that one is really, really simple. If you just want to add something to encourage people to play your subclass in a certain way, give them advantage on certain things. Like I mentioned in my other video, if you give them advantage on attack rolls, the spells that they're going to learn are going to be more focused on spells that use attack rolls, like Scorching Ray or Disintegrate. If you give them something that deals with saving throws, then they're probably going to learn more spells like Fireball or Lightning that requires the enemy to make a saving throw instead. So it's a really, really simple way to kind of guide your players into this playstyle you want this subclass to emulate by simply encouraging certain types of attacks or things like that.
Yeah.
Anything interesting? Any interesting ideas from that?
Nothing specifically, I don't think.
Makes sense. Cool. So yeah, Favored by the Gods is another one where you can add dice to a roll. This one is uniquely useful simply because it says if you fail a saving throw, meaning there are two different ways you can add something to a roll. You can do it when you make the roll, or you can do it after you failed the roll. And anything that happens after you fail or after you don't get the result that you want is going to be more useful because you will never waste it. If you have to declare your advantage before you roll, you might roll a 19 on your first die and a 20 on your second. Well, yeah, it's nice to get your crit, but you would have hit with the 19 anyways.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that you can use to kind of balance new options that you're going to add is, do you want this to happen after the roll or before the roll?
Yeah, and I think that's one of those abilities that I think kind of rewards advanced players, because I do like mechanics that really reward people who are kind of thinking about the mathematical side of things. And it's not like that choice or distinction is a bad one for a player who's kind of not as focused on that side of the game, but it does give those interesting choices of I can get a little bit of extra oomph out of this thing, a little more consistency if I save it for my failed rolls.
Mm-hmm. It's always fun, especially again once you start dealing with ways to kind of control random. Like we talked about the Wild Magic Sorcerer in the last one, and as you level up, they start giving you things like you can, when you roll on the Wild Magic Surge table, you can roll twice and take whichever one you want. Just those tiny little modifications to randomness feel really powerful because it gives choice and control to the player. And anytime you are increasing their control over something that feels random, they're going to feel more powerful. It's one of the reasons I like adding random features to subclasses, where roll a die and you get a random result, simply because later upgrading it to roll a die and you get a slightly less random result just feels like such a big upgrade.
Yeah, I can see that.
Going to 6th level with Divine Soul, they get Empowered Healing. It's exactly what it sounds like. You can burn a sorcery point to re-roll any number of dice that are rolled to heal someone. whenever you or an ally within 5 feet of you rolls dice to heal. Again, this is another thing that you will see a lot with sorcerer subclasses is other ways to spend your sorcery points. Yes, meta magic is super, super cool, and it's massively useful. So is flexible casting and changing slots into sorcery points and sorcery points into slots. However, it does get kind of dull when you've cast your 400th quickened spell. So adding things like empowered healing turns this into a remarkably useful thing because of a number of words they choose. Things like you can spend 1 sorcery point to reroll any number. So can, you don't have to. Anytime you see the word can, it's always going to be better than must, or if it just says. And then any number means you get to pick and choose. If this felt too powerful, you could very easily balance it by just going, you reroll all of them. And that makes them make the choice of, okay, well, I've got 1 here, but I also have 2 6s here. Maybe I don't want to reroll this. Whereas this version, you just go, okay, well, I've got a 6, a 4, a 6, and then 2 1s. I'm going to reroll the 2 1s.
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't I? There's no possible way I could roll lower.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But I mean, it's always nice to have options like that. And as we were just saying, I think knowing which numbers are the optimal ones to reroll is another thing that rewards players who are thinking about this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is another really great example of kind of shifting how someone plays this class. Because again, the divine magic aspect, you have access to the entire cleric's spell list. A lot of people think of clerics as, oh, they're the healer. They heal. That's not true of... that's never been 100% true of clerics. It's just been something kind of forced on them for a little while. But 5th edition clerics in particular, there are a lot of domains that have nothing to do with healing. And when you look at their spell list, they have some major awesome spells that can do crazy damage. So by incentivizing healing, by giving them a use for their sorcery points when they heal, you are kind of guiding the player to be, okay, let's make this a little bit more of a support style sorcerer. Which is a unique way to play the sorcerer. Most people that play sorcerers are, quick casting a fireball while hitting people with a firebolt and, doing all these things like that. And this makes you play a little bit differently.
Well, I'm always biased towards support sorcerers and casters because the thing that people like the thing with support spells is they're 10 times more consistent than anything else you can cast. You can cast a fireball and everyone can pass their save. If you cast a buff spell on your friend, they're getting that buff spell. In
4th edition, they had 4 different roles, and my personal favorite was always the controller role, because, and especially in 5th edition, the biggest balancing factor in combat is who has more actions on site of combat. So anything that can increase the number of actions or the quality of actions you have on your side, or decrease the number of actions or the quality of actions on the other side, is going to make a much bigger difference than doing 100 points of damage to anyone. And so I love control-based classes in general, whether that's healing and keeping people up, or like my personal favorite class in 5th edition is the monk, because a lot of people think it's this crazy damage dealer, and it's not. If you try to build as a damage dealer, it just doesn't work. But if you focus on the control aspects and all the different things you can do, like giving enemies disadvantage on all attack rolls against you, using your bonus action, or stunning people and taking them out of combat for a round, or running across the wall to get to, the caster that's hidden behind, 12 really big beefy guys. All these different things are a lot more fun than just going up and going, I punch you in the face.
Absolutely.
So yeah, speaking of control, when we get to 14th level, you can use a bonus action to manifest a pair of spectral wings from your back. While the wings are present, you have a flying speed of 30 feet. They last until you're incapacitated, you die, or you dismiss them as a bonus action. And then when you choose Divine Magic, you actually choose an affinity, good, evil, law, chaos, or neutrality. And based on the affinity you choose, it changes the appearance. Like eagle wings for good or law, bat wings for evil or chaos, and dragonfly wings for neutrality.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that's really important when you're homebrewing, is the idea of put flavor into your homebrews. You know, nothing about what the wings look like is going to change anything in combat. It has no effect on how hard you're going to hit, how many enemies you're going to fight, but it feels so much better to make your choice at first level of, well, I'm going to be a law-based one. That you now have cool-looking eagle wings.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as you said, it has no mechanical effect, but it has such a profound effect in your visualization of your own character, and that's a very important part of it. And I'm all about building your character to appeal to your initial vision of whatever you had in your brain, and neat flavor effects like that are a big component of what I go for in a class when I'm a player, which doesn't happen as often as I'd like.
Yeah, forever DM.
Yeah.
The other thing about this the other thing that's nice about cosmetic effects and flavor, there's no balancing necessary. Put whatever flavor you want in, it's not going to break the game. But the mechanical benefit of otherworldly wings is huge. The flying wizard turret is a super useful thing in literally every RPG. Like, I've never found an RPG where if you can have a spellcaster that can fly, it is not overpowered.
Yeah, I mean, my old D&D group, when we were playing 3rd edition, we still talk about for years how we found a combo where the druid would turn into a bird and lift up the sorcerer, and they called it Operation Blasty Bird. And we still talk about it years later, and now you're just getting it baked right into a class. You don't even need a druid.
And the nice thing about this, again, concentration is a huge limiting factor for spells. There's a fly spell. Sorcerers have access to it. Most spellcasting classes have access to it. But it's a concentration spell, meaning you can't cast other concentration spells, which tend to be the more powerful ones. And anytime you take damage, you have to make a concentration check. When you fail that check, your spell ends. And I have had players who have cast the flying spell and have been 60 feet in the air, got hit by an arrow, and have fallen 60 feet. With this isn't a concentration effect. These are just wings that exist until you are incapacitated, which doesn't always mean you're reduced to 0 hit points. But if you're 30, 40 feet in the air, it's probably going to be because you got to 0 hit points. And then it doesn't really matter that you're falling that far. It's one failed death save no matter what.
Yeah.
But yeah, so understand when you add a new movement thing to your classes, that's a big deal. We talked about it with the dragon sorcerer, where they get very, very similar. This is almost identical to the dragon sorcerer one, where they get wings. Adding a movement style to your subclass, generally at higher levels, feels really, really good. The one that most people forget about in 2nd edition, I'll say it, or in 5th edition, I'll say it again. I said it in the last video. Swimming speed. A lot of people think, well, swimming speed doesn't really matter. Well, if you are underwater combat rules are, unless you're using a piercing weapon, all of your attacks are made with disadvantage. Unless you have a swimming speed. Then there's no limits. It doesn't matter
until it does.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, again, if you want to kind of direct them into a certain play style, giving them a different type of movement can be really good. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Again, the barbarian has a fly speed as well if they take one of their if they take the eagle totem at a certain one. But their flying speed only happens on their turn. They can't stay in the air between turns.
Right.
So changing just that little thing of, well, you don't have the ability to hover, changes how the character plays.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but it reminds me a lot of like Magic the Gathering design, where each of the colors, like, they all can do kind of the same thing, but they all have to go about it in very different ways, and they've all got different drawbacks and stuff. Like, if you want to remove something from the board. Every color has a way to do that, but they will have to play very differently to do that thing, and they can all remove different things easier than others. And I like that effect in class design. So having different different caveats to flying is a really awesome mechanic.
Finally, the 18th level one, Unearthly Recovery. As a bonus action, when you have fewer than half your hit points remaining, you can regain a number of hit points equal to half your hit point maximum. You can use this feature. You can't use it again until you finish a long rest. Another really common balancing thing we talk about all the time is I call them one and done abilities. And I always talk about the elixir paradox, which is effectively in games like Final Fantasy. You can get these things called elixirs. They're super powerful. They give you all your hit points, all your magic points back, but you cannot buy them anywhere in the game. They don't drop from monsters. There's a limited number of them in the entire game. And what invariably happens is you get to the final boss and you beat the final boss and you've got 7 elixirs in your inventory because you're always like, well, I don't know if this is the perfect time to use that. One and done abilities always have that problem. Even just changing something from once per long rest to twice per long rest, they will use the second use of it significantly more than anything that is a one and done ability. So if you are creating a one and done ability, it needs to be sufficiently powerful. And it's a bonus action. You get half your hit points back. It feels like a good one and done ability. And when you start looking at action economy, being able to use your bonus action to heal yourself while you use your action to cast a spell or do something else really powerful feels really, really good. Especially since most bonus action abilities that heal don't really do that much healing. You generally have to use your action to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially as a bonus action, that's a really powerful ability that I can definitely see. Like, you know, that's one of those times when it's like you're saving it for the boss, but you're not wasting it to save it for the boss because you probably will get very good use out of it when you're at the boss.
So, as far as the Divine Soul Sorcerer for you, your thoughts and feelings on it from someone that has a little bit more experience outside of D&D.
Yeah, I would say right off the bat, having access to the cleric spell list, that is already enough, as I said in my mind, to justify this subclass. But all of those individual extra mechanics and flavor that you get throughout, those absolutely add so much value to it. So I gotta say, I like it.
Cool. Let's hit at least one more before we start going outside. And I will give you the choice.
Okay.
Of the ones that we have here, we have Aberrant Mind, which is a kind of psionics-based one. Clockwork Soul, which is modrums and mechanics. Shadow Magic, which should be self-explanatory. Or Storm Sorcery, which is all about wind and air. Any of those calling out to you sounds cool?
I've always been interested in D&D psionics, but never known much about it. So why don't we take a look at that one?
Cool. Psionics in themselves, I can't remember if they did a ton of psionics in 3rd edition.
They did, but it was like its own system that was external to spellcasting, which is why, as a person who'd never read those rule books, I was like, what is this thing?
I remember psionics... The first time they really started having an emphasis on psionics in 2nd edition with the Dark Sun campaign setting, because magic was just completely fucked in Dark Sun, especially divine, like the gods are all dead. So they introduced the psionics to the thing, and every time they try to add psionics to an edition of D&D, it's always weird because it's effectively reinventing the wheel. Because everything else that deals with supernatural powers is generally governed by your magic system. And the magic systems, they put a lot of work into making them work. They have to. And then they go, well, we're going to give you cool supernatural powers, but they're not going to be limited by the rules that we've used for Magic thus far.
I do see some value in that though, because it's very much the kind of thing where if you're just overhauling the system you're currently doing over and over and over, there might be design avenues that will never come up. Whereas if periodically you're like, okay, let's throw this thing away and design a new spellcasting system from scratch, you can stumble onto a lot of things that can help you in other areas of the game.
Definitely.
So I mean, I guess that's a homebrewing tip too. Is
yeah, you know,
sometimes just throw a system away and redesign it and see what you find.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, it's the interesting thing with Psionics in 5th edition. I covered they had an Unearthed Arcana, which is basically kind of playtest material that they will release, and then they will have you people do surveys on it.
Yeah.
I love the Unearthed Arcana stuff, but I kind of stopped covering a lot of it because it would eventually show up in a book.
Right.
And then when I covered the book, it'd be like, well, I've already covered this.
Yeah.
The psionics, though, the original version of psionics that they created, they actually created an entire psionic system instead of just features that were considered psionic. And it was a really cool system, but it was not designed well. Basically, you would get a psionic die that started as a D4, and as you got higher, the die would get bigger, which is cool. I like dice pools. I've always loved dice pools. And making them get bigger is always fun. However, the way that the psionic die worked is anytime you used it, you would roll it. And if you rolled the maximum on the die, it would get upgraded to the next die size, up to your maximum size. And if you rolled the minimum on it, it would get downgraded to the next one lower. And if you rolled a 1 on a d4, your psionic die was gone, and you couldn't use any more psionic powers until you took a long rest, until the next day, effectively.
Ooh, that feels bad.
It was a really weird system, because theoretically, the larger your die was, the less chance you had of it either getting upgraded or downgraded, which effectively turned it into an limited resource, because you never used up the die. But then on the exact opposite side, when you had a small die, it was really easy to roll the minimum and then watch it just keep going on, and then not be able to use any of your psionic abilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing the only thing I don't like about that specifically is that there's not a lot of player choice there, because it's just kind of random. Either your dice is going to do very well today, or you lose it today. And the only control you have is how much you cast, which I don't like design when it's like your choice is between playing your class or not. Dark Heresy is one of my favorite systems that I go back to all the time. And it had that exact same problem with Psychers, where every time you cast a spell, there was the possibility of very bad things happen, including you literally exploding. It's like wild magic. It's like wild magic, except it can literally kill you. So, and the only thing you can do to prevent it is just not use your spells, and that doesn't feel fun. So yeah, that would be my complaint about that psionic system specifically.
So, and that was kind of what happened with the system. They shelved it, which upsets me a little bit, because I think there's promise in the system. It just needed tweaking and things like that. And I hope they bring it back for maybe a different subclass, or maybe make a whole class built around it, as opposed to trying to create a system that you can fit into a bunch of different classes. Again, anytime you can do something that interacts with a bunch of different classes, you have balance issues. But if you can limit it to a single class, you can be a little bit more creative with it. I'm hoping that happens. However, go ahead.
I was going to say that would actually be a really neat weapon enchantment, where every time it crits, it grows in damage die. Every time it critical misses, it shrinks. I mean, there is some cool stuff you can do with that.
There's so much, and again, if you change it from a single die to a dice pool, you can change things about it, because then having only a single die that can be gone in as little as 2 or 3 rolls, that sucks. Having, 2 or 3 dice that may go away, you still will run out of them eventually, but it feels a lot better when, it's going to take a lot more for you to get rid of it. Anyway, going to the actual Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, which is the psionic flavor of Sorcerer. The first thing you get in it is just like we mentioned before. You get what's called psionic spells. It expands the spell list and effectively just means when you gain a sorcerer level, you can choose to learn these spells in addition to the other ones, but you don't always know them. Oh, wait, never mind. Hold up. No, actually, psionic spells, these are spells that you just automatically know. I was wrong. There are some... so these you don't even have to learn. You just always have these available to you. Different classes and subclasses do it differently, but that's how it works here. And for the most part, it's a lot of warlock spells, things like Arms of Hadar, Hunger of Hadar, which are just creepy Cthulhu spells, is what I call them. If you're not familiar with them, or Avard's Black Tentacles. They all come with a theme, which includes darkness, tentacles, and bad things happening.
Of course.
A lot of them do psychic damage. So that's the first thing that you do is they just expand the spell list, which again, really simple way to flavor the class is just give them access to spells they normally wouldn't. Or even if there's spells that are normally on the sorcerer spell list, by making it so they automatically know these and they don't have to use their 2 spells per level that they learn, can modify how they play the class because they have these spells already learned and they can choose other spells to go with them. So always a nice way to do it. And then the other thing that you get at first level is called telepathic speech. You can probably guess how this one works. It's a bonus action. You can choose a creature you can see within 30 feet. You and the chosen creature can speak telepathically with each other while the two of you are within a number of miles of each other equal to your charisma modifier. And to understand each other, you must each speak mentally a language the other knows. And the connection lasts for a number of minutes equal to your sorcerer level. It ends early if you're incapacitated, die, or if you use this ability to form a connection with a different creature. So this is another thing where people massively undervalue the ability to speak covertly with other people, especially over large distances. My favorite example of this, I was playing back when I used to do the Adventure League and used to do the convention circuit in Wisconsin. I was playing an adventure where we met with a mind flayer. And we knew the mind flayer was going to betray us. It's a mind flayer.
Yeah, that's what they're for.
When we got into that, like, we come in and they're being really nice and, they're going to help us get to this city in the Underdark that they know. Like, we're allies at that point. We knew the dagger was coming. And so we told the dungeon master, or we told the mind flayer, says, you made a really, really, like, they were negotiating. It's like, it's really good. Can we just take a little side break and talk so we can figure out if we want to take your deal? And mind flayer's like, yeah, sure. It's perfectly fine. So we go into a side room. And the first thing that happens is we had a couple warlocks that didn't have this ability, but they had another ability that allowed them to send telepathic messages and receive them. And so what they did is when we started the conversation, they told the dungeon master, all of this is going to happen in our heads. None of us are going to say anything out loud, and we're going to use the 2 warlocks as relay posts. And the dungeon master's like, okay, whatever. He wasn't really paying attention. So we go, okay, he's going to betray us, right? Yeah, he's totally going to betray us. We need to betray him first. Yeah, it totally makes sense. All right, so you do this, and we come up with this really good plan about how we're going to kill him before he kills us, because mind flayers are bad. Yeah. And are not fun if they stun everybody in a cone. And so as soon as we come out, we are met with the mind flayer and his 2 Glabrezu minions that he just happened to have around. And we go, wait, what in the hell happened? And the dungeon master's like, you guys just had a conversation about how you were going to betray him in the room right next to him. Why wouldn't he prepare for the betrayal? And the warlocks go, he couldn't have hurt us. Well, why not? Because we did it all telepathically.
Mm-hmm.
And the DM's like, oh, there's no Glablazus. And so we come out and we smited the dude. We just completely obliterated him.
Yeah.
So the idea of being able to have telepathic speech, even the limited form that you have here, where it's just between you and one other person, is unbelievably useful.
Absolutely.
And then you can also use this, from a scouting perspective. This stays connected for a number of miles, equal to your charisma modifier. Mm-hmm. If your scout is going more than 5 miles ahead of you, they may want to reconsider. That's like a day's journey. They may not want to be that far away. So you could use this on your super sneaky rogue who's going to go in and scout the enemy and have a constant source of communication with them.
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of those abilities that, maybe in combat you're only going to find a couple uses, but like when you're in investigation mode, there'll be 1,000,001 ways you can use this ability, and that's not to be underestimated.
So again, if you're creating homebrew materials, giving unique ways to communicate to your class, like something that I harp on a lot because so many people just never use it, is rogues have a defining feature called I can't remember what it's called. It's rogue speak. I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head.
Rogue or thieves can't?
Thieves can't. There we go. Yeah. They have thieves can't. Thieves can't is massively cool because it is both a written language and a spoken language that only rogues can learn. No one else in the world can learn it unless you take a level in rogue. Having a personal communication form that only other rogues can speak is so incredibly useful.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's so many different things that you could use it for. I made the same thing about Druidcraft, which is the Druid special language. Druidcraft, you can leave messages that you can identify there's a Druidcraft message there with a perception check, but you can't read it unless you're a Druid. So you can literally send your Druid ahead as your scout, and anytime they find something that the party needs to avoid, they can leave a Druidcraft message. The party won't be able to understand what you could literally just say, you guys are so stupid. But they'll be able to tell there's a Druidcraft message there and go, I bet that's a trap.
Yeah, I think I remember that being a thing where there was a Druid language in 3rd edition. And I think they had the specific kind of very difficult caveat that if you taught anyone the Druid language, you lose all your Druid powers.
Yeah, because it has a it has the ability to be abused. But the 5th edition rules, like they can't understand it, but anyone can make a DC 15 perception check to notice that there is a mark there that's not supposed to be there. Mm-hmm. And even without understanding it, you can, it's the same thing that I've been playing Elden Ring a ton, much more than I really should. I'm on my 3rd character. But one of the things that happens all the time is you can leave messages for other players. And something that I absolutely love is people will leave messages right in front of a trap. And the messages glow bright white. And so when you're in this dark dungeon and you're not going to see the pressure plate that will unleash firebolts at you, you can look down and see this giant thing. And then you read it, it says trap ahead. It's massively useful.
Yeah. So. Well, and I always, one little thing, this is not as much homebrew so much as it is just like general campaign design and stuff. I always like the idea of making players kind of pick their battles a little bit. Like not like they can spend an hour focused on one thing and it turns out it doesn't matter. So every once in a while I really enjoy littering in the occasional puzzle that's worthless, just to make people really question if stuff is worth it. So like someone could come across some thieves' cant and be like, oh, what's it mean? Is there a secret bit of loot somewhere? And maybe it just means like warning, floor is slippery when wet.
I love that. There is because
I mean you want people to not hyper focus, so I think it's it can be a fun thing to litter in the occasional worthless puzzle just to keep
Were
people from doing that.
were you into Critical Role during the chair incident?
Probably, but honestly, the campaigns just meld together so much in my
So
brain.
I think it was campaign 2.
Yeah,
Matt is describing a room, and he describes that there's a chair in the middle of the room. Just kind of
yeah.
offhand. The party, like live during the show, spent an hour investigating this completely pointless chair,
Oh
just
no.
because the idea. I can't. It's a literary term. Um,
Was it the Chekhov's gun
yeah,
kind of thing?
Chekhov's gun. There we go.
Yeah,
Where if you describe something, you don't use it within the next 10 pages, you've wasted your
yeah.
time or something. Just the Chekhov's gun kind of the thing where they're just like, well, he described it, it's got to be something.
It's
They
got to be relevant.
spent an hour looking at this chair, and Matt's finally like, it's a chair, move on. And it was the most hilarious thing in the world. And so yeah, every so
Amazing.
often it's nice to just throw the random chair in there,
Yeah. Well, in
for the
those
party to
moments,
fix it.
like those moments, as much as they may sound like hostile design to litter in these moments, uh, 9 times out of 10, the players end up really enjoying them, and it just becomes something to chat about later. Like one of my favorite encounters I ever designed was, the players walked into a tavern, and there's the brooding stranger in the corner, obviously. And so they're like, okay, well, what else is there to do in a tavern? We're going to go talk to the brooding stranger. So they went to him and they spent like a half hour table time trying to draw some form of quest or adventure out of this guy until he finally admitted that, oh, yeah, the bartender just keeps me here to keep adventurers drinking.
I love it.
And the players remember that moment.
Well, and
It's not a bad thing.
it has an in-game expert. Like, that is an incredibly smart thing. Again, I have a degree in business. That is a brilliant business move right there.
Oh, yeah.
So I say, yeah, you want to buy me a drink? Maybe I'll tell you.
Exactly.
Like, it's a brilliant business move. You have a very smart tavern keeper right there.
Oh, exactly. Probably made a killing.
So, moving on with the Aberrant Mind. At 6th level, when you cast any spell first level or higher from your psionic spells feature, so those extra spells that they have, you can cast it by expending a spell slot as normal, or by spending a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level. If you cast a spell using sorcery points, it requires no verbal or somatic components, and it requires no material components unless they're consumed by the spell. So this is where the psionic aspect of the caster really starts to come in. They can do things without verbal or somatic components. They can cast things that require material components that aren't consumed. They are psychically casting these spells. From a flavor standpoint, it feels really good, but from a mechanical standpoint, this is another one that people kind of undervalue, not using somatic or verbal components. It is crazy useful. If you can just look at someone and then wink and a fireball erupts from you, like there's no way to like counterspell. A lot of people, a lot of DMs hate counterspell in 5th edition. It's like, well, it ruins things. It doesn't. You just don't understand how to create interesting encounters. But
well, and it also like there's deniability if there's no components to it, because one of the standard things that happens that players sometimes complain about is they'll cast a dominate person or some equivalent spell of some sort on an important NPC and be like, you're doing what I say. And then all that guy's guards are like, we saw you do that, you're dead now. Whereas with it just happening in your brain, maybe nobody knows what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't even thought about that aspect. Like, I'm thinking about counterspell. Counterspell requires you to be able to see the spell being cast.
Yeah.
And if there's no components, it is physically impossible to counterspell these other things. But yeah, from that aspect, like, Detect Thoughts is one of their psionic spells. In anyone that treats a world with magic as a real living world has to treat a spell or an ability that allows you to reach into someone's mind as a violation. Yeah. There's no other way to look at the ability to just delve into someone's thoughts. It
Yeah.
has
And
to
what's
be.
worse is it's like an obvious one because they just start going like abracadabra, ooh, and it's like, well, okay, you're clearly reading my thoughts. Fuck you.
So yeah, the ability to cast detect thoughts, or another one, super super fun. There's a spell called Dissonant Whispers.
Mhm.
I'm going to read you the entire spell here because this is one of their psionic spells, and being able to
Yeah.
cast this without people seeing is a huge dick move, but would be super cool. You whisper a discordant melody that only one creature of your choice within range can hear, racking it with terrible pain. Target must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, it takes 3d6 psychic damage and must immediately use its reaction, if available, to move as far as its speed allows away from you. The creature doesn't move into obviously dangerous ground, such as a fire or a pit. On a successful save, the target takes half as much damage and doesn't have to move away. A deafened creature automatically succeeds on the save. So, using this, you could literally do the "No, I will not date you" thing, where you just randomly say something completely out of ordinary, cast this spell, and they would go "ah" and run away. Like, there are so many different ways you could play that to your advantage to make the other
Absolutely.
person look like they are in the wrong, and that is
Yeah.
just
I mean,
one
you
spell.
can get guards out of their posts without alerting everyone that something's wrong. You just have someone do a silent image mouse run up, and then you just, hit them with the psionic scream and run away, and then no more guard at that station, and no one's the wiser as to why it happened.
I mean, so again, a lot of people look at this and are like, "Oh, well, that's kind of stupid." No, there's so many situations. Even in combat, there are tons of situations where a random spell going off and them not being able to tell who cast it, especially for concentration spells. Again, one of the best things to do if you're dealing with a spellcaster that is using a concentration spell, anyone that exists in a 5th edition world will know when the bad spell comes out, go to the dude that is focused on it and beat them up until they stop.
Till the fingers stop wiggling.
Yeah. But if you can't tell who cast the spell, there's no way, without metagaming from the DM, there's no way a character could tell who cast the spell.
Well, and as a mechanic, you can even use that as an encounter design against the players. Like someone's casting a spell, but it's a crowded room, and they're a psionic sorcerer. So now you have to use your investigation skills to see who is it who's holding the doors shut with their mind, or whatever malign effect.
Also, at 9th level, they get access to the telekinesis spell, which would just be super fun to do without anything. Because it's a concentration spell, but allows you to pick people up, throw them, crush them. And if you're just sitting there going, "Stop hitting yourself! Stop hitting yourself!"
Yeah.
So yes, super super useful, and again, very very thematic to the class when you're homebrewing, doing things like removing verbal components or somatic components to a spell. Depending on how you flavor it, can really make the class feel special. Like, this feels like a psychic class if they can do stuff like this. And all they did was remove components, which are an important part of spellcasting in 5th edition. Don't think that you can just always remove components and it'll never break anything. It 100% will. But it's a limited version. They can only cast the specific spells that you gave them. But it's cool enough and it feels good enough that you're going to have something cool. The other thing they get at 6th level is Psychic Defense. You have resistance to psychic damage, and you have advantage on saving throws against being charmed and frightened. Again, makes perfect sense. Another thing that makes the character feel more powerful by simply giving them advantage, or sometimes at higher levels you can give them immunity to certain conditions. Always feels good. Like monks at, I think, 9th level get immunity to poison and poison damage. We met a green dragon once, and everyone else is really like, "Oh, the breath attack!" And I'm just sitting there going, "Minty
players." That's the single moment. Like, players are very proud when they beat a boss or whatever, but players are never prouder than when they're immune to something.
Yeah, super fun. Going forward to the 14th level ability, it's called Revelation and Fresh. As a bonus action, you can spend 1 or more sorcery points to magically transform your body for 10 minutes. For each sorcery point you spend, you can gain one of the following benefits of your choice, the effect of which lasts until the transformation ends, so for about 10 minutes. You can see invisible creatures within 60 feet of you. Your eyes also turn black or become writhing sensory tendrils. You gain a flying speed equal to your walking speed, and you can hover. As you fly, your skin glistens with mucus or shines with an otherworldly light. You gain a swimming speed equal to twice your walking speed, and you can breathe underwater. Moreover, gills grow from your neck or fan out from behind your ears. Your fingers become webbed, and you grow writhing cilia that extend through your clothing. And the final one, your body, along with any equipment you are wearing or carrying, becomes slimy and pliable. You can move through any space as narrow as 1 inch without squeezing, and you can spend 5 feet of movement to escape from non-magical restraints or being grappled. So this is a little bit less Psychic Warrior and a little bit more Cthulhu crazy shit.
Well, I love the idea of, like, these are all useful utility abilities, but you have to just come off completely horrifying to your party in order to use them.
It's amazing. It's so wonderful. And again, this is another example of flavor is such an important thing. Every one of these things would be useful without the flavor.
Yeah.
But adding the flavor just feels so much more. And a lot of these, the flavor is actually a limiting factor. Not because in combat, your enemies are going to care if your eyes turn black or you start getting tentacles out of your eyes. But using any of these anywhere else, the other people in the world are going to react to you. And even using it in combat, you know, stories come back about the heroes that vanquish this from various things. Maybe one of your party members in a tavern mentions, you know, tentacles coming out of your eyes. The people in the town are going to treat you different from it. So it's something that you have to think about before using it.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, like, it's good utility, but the downside isn't mechanical downside. It's role-playing downside, which is not to be undervalued, the downside of that. Because, yeah, it might be useful to do some of this stuff, but then you have an angry mob after you, and that also matters.
Finally, 18th level one is called Warping Implosion. As an action, you can teleport to an unoccupied space you can see within 120 feet of you. Immediately after you did disappear, each creature within 30 feet of the space you left must make a strength save against your spell save DC. On a failed save, a creature takes 3d10 force damage and is pulled straight towards the space you left, ending in an unoccupied space as close to your former space as possible. On a successful stage, creature takes half as much damage and isn't pulled. Once you use this feature, you can't use so again until you finish a long rest, or unless you spend 5 sorcery points to use it again. So this is another thing where you have to consider the base class.
Yeah.
Normally, if you say as an action, that means you choose this or you choose a spell to cast. Because most good spells are going to take your action.
Yeah.
So, thank you, computer. I hit a button on my keyboard and changed everything for a second. Super fun.
Yeah.
With the sorcerer, they can quicken spells. So theoretically, this can be used to create what I like to call fireball formation.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say I love anything that can force movement because the combo power is delicious.
So, as their action, they teleport away. They draw a bunch of it. May not be all of them, but draw a bunch of people into a small space. Then you land a fireball, a firestorm, a lightning bolt, whatever floats your boat. You're not limited because this isn't a spell. You are not limited to a level of spell or anything. You just get to do it. And I mean, it's a really nice wombo combo. And you can use sorcery points to do it again, which is another thing that I tend to like with higher level sorcery features is let them spend sorcery points. Generally a decent amount. 5 sorcery points at level 18, that is almost a third of your sorcery points.
Yeah, it's a significant amount.
But it's it's a cool ability. And again, there's a ton of different things. The limiting aspect of it is the fact that it is basically a 30-foot radius sphere, and it's all creatures. So the one thing you do need to make sure you're aware of is, where are your allies?
Right.
Because if you draw your allies in and then nuke them with a fireball, they're probably going to be less than thrilled. So that's another thing you can do when you're creating balance for abilities, is make the area of effect of the ability a little bit bigger and make it affect all creatures.
Yeah.
Because that forces them to be a little bit more tactical when they're using it. And it's a really, really simple way to balance things. And if something just isn't having the benefit that you want, make it target each creature that you choose, or all enemies. Choose your words carefully. By changing the words, you can massively change the balance of the ability. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
So, we've been talking for a little bit, and I don't want to keep you here too much longer. But I would feel really, really bad if we didn't get at least one non-D&D thing that you think might be a cool homebrew sorcerer. Now that you've seen a couple different flavors of sorcerer that already exist, and you've seen kind of how the sorcerer works, from your just all the different systems, what do you think would make a cool sorcerer?
Wow. Okay. Drawing from various systems and all that. Obviously, there's the your classic gishes, where you're the melee caster. Obviously, there's a lot of that, but the one that I don't see enough of, that I really like anytime I do see it, is the sort of like I like the druid transform stuff on other classes.
Aha!
I love that kind of stuff because you don't see it very often, but there's a lot of design potential there, I feel. So some form of a sorcerer who has transformation abilities, maybe maybe you limit it more than a druid would, and you've got like, oh, this is a sorcerer who can transform into only one thing. But I think there's a ton of design potential there.
Definitely. I believe the shadow magic, if I remember correctly, has a shadow form they can transform
Oh, that's perfect.
into.
Yeah.
But I 100% agree. It's not something that's done a lot. Like, there's some subclasses of druid where you can use your wild shape to do different things. Like, there's a star-based druid that, for the life of me, I can't remember what it's called. But you can transform into an astral form. There we go. Astral. You can transform into an astral form, which, depending on which constellation you decide to embody, gives you different abilities. And kind of the same thing can happen with a sorcerer. Just understand, in the same way that a druid is a full caster, a sorcerer is a full caster. If you are giving them the ability to transform into a different form, understand anything they do in that form, if they can cast spells with it, they will. So understand that you may be giving them this really cool ability plus 9th level spells.
Yeah, and I mean that's a balancing act for sure. Is you have to decide with your homebrew class if they are able to transform into another form. Am I making the new form weak enough to allow spell casting to be like balanced, or am I making this form so strong that they have to do one or the other while they're in it?
And that's the thing is, if you create a form that they can't cast spells in, well, the choice that they're going to have in that situation is this worth a 9th level spell slot or an 8th level spell slot or multiple spell slots? So understand, when you're creating something like a transformation style thing, understand that you need to take both of those things into account. Because if you don't, again, it's either going to be massively overpowered to the point where no one will want it at the table, or no one will ever use the transformation aspect, which really sucks. It's not fun when you create something and people don't use it.
Yeah, and I mean, you can do like there are always extra adjustments and stuff you can get off of this. Like you could say, oh, this is a sorcerer whose whole thing is they transform into a small or medium-sized dragon form. Uh, and you could have most of the abilities and stuff about that. And you can start adding class features where it's like, oh, you get to you get to cast a self buff for free when you transform using one of your spell slots, or you can do concentration spells only in your form. So there's lots of stuff you can play with both casting and transforming at the same time to make it so that it's not fully one or the other, but there are caveats and trade-offs that you need to take into account.
Well, and that's another thing. Druids do it every so often. Paladins do it a lot. Is the idea of using your spell slots as a limited resource instead of as spells. Paladins can burn a spell slot to smite. Moon druids can actually burn spell slots and heal their wild shape form. So doing the exact same thing where while you're in there, maybe you can't cast spells, but you can use your spell slots to do other things, whether it's to heal yourself, to cause damage, to pump up attacks, things like that can feel really, really satisfying without taking away from the fact that, well, I am a full spellcaster. If I'm not using my spell slots, I feel useless. So I like that idea.
Yeah, and you can also play with the sorcerer abilities a little bit too with the points. You could say, like, you could make this transform ability crazily strong, like ridiculously strong, but make it cost sorcerer points every single turn to maintain, or have that particular form have inherent spells that cost points to perform. Like if it's a dragon form, like we said earlier, you could say, breath attack costs 2 sorcerer's points.
Really, really cool, interesting stuff. So
so I mean, there's a lot of ways you can take that as a home brewer, I think.
Yeah. So final thoughts. Overall, with the sorcerer being a full spellcaster, but having that meta magic option and that limited resource that you can use for so many different things, there's a lot of potential in homebrewing for the sorcerer that I don't think has been tapped. Like when if you actually look at the subclasses, the original class had 2 subclasses, and now it's gone from 2 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's gone from 2 to 7 in what, 6 years, 7 years now, something like that, 8 years maybe.
Not as many as you'd hope.
It's not a massive expansion compared to like fighters that have like 47 new classes. So I think there's a lot of untapped potential, and a lot of the subclasses tend to gravitate onto similar themes. Like we chose 2 of the more unique ones, but if you look at Shadow Magic and Storm Sorcery, they're really, really similar. It just like how they work. They'll give you some bonuses to spells here. They'll give you some extra effects when you cast certain spells here. And it's kind of a template that has been followed. Thinking about sorcery points in different ways, or even spell slots in different ways, you can come up with some really cool, interesting stuff. And the one thing you want to focus on is the idea that sorcerers are spontaneous, innate spellcasters. Yeah. So something in there should have some form of innate connection to them, or some sort of spontaneity built into it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Thoughts, final thoughts from you, Will?
Final thoughts on just sorcerers in general is, like when I was reading through the 5th edition book for the first time, Sorcerer was the one that I took to kind of learn the system with. And when you start a new system and you find something really cool and you just get super excited to play that system, Sorcerers just hit me exactly like that. I kind of skimmed through all the classes, and honestly, just the design of Sorcerers and all the tools they have to work with in 5th edition, there is so much flexibility, like design flexibility in there, that I absolutely love it. And at some point I will eventually end up playing a 5th edition game for sure, and I will almost certainly be playing a sorcerer because man, I want to try this thing out.
Awesome. Well, that is going to be all from us today. As always, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your idea for a cool sorcerer subclass from anywhere? Doesn't have to be doesn't even have to be fantasy related. Come up with, a 40k sorcerer. Put that in the comments down below. Will, if people wanted to find you on the interwebs, where would they look?
The two places that work best would be YouTube. William SRD is the name of the channel. And the other place would be Twitter. I am at William Sysrefdoc, Sys as in SYS, not CIS. Yeah, you'll find me there.
And he is remarkably fun to follow on Twitter, especially when I randomly tag him in things that have nothing to do with him, just because the letters SRD are in it somewhere.
It's everywhere once you start looking.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, check out his stuff. Like I said, his YouTube channel, there is a lot of really interesting, fun stuff. And like I said, his Critter's Guide to D&D, both of them are brilliant. You had 2 or 3 different videos on the Legend of Vox Machina series that were really, really interesting. I watched the one about the Curse of Marisha and just the stuff that she had to deal with, which I remember. Again, I was there at the first episode, and I remember watching Marisha kind of go through these weird things and stuff. And
that video was very weird because I put that video out kind of under the assumption that this was like an old topic that the community was over, and I didn't realize these are still open wounds.
We could have an entire we could have a 3-hour-long conversation on the weird things that have happened.
I would have approached that video very differently if I realized that this was still ongoing.
Well, and I mean, some of the I can neither confirm nor deny that I have a copy of the Feast of Legend game that Critical Role did, which is the Wendy's RPG that they published, and then immediately had to remove from the internet because 4 people got upset about something that didn't matter. The crazy internet. Things that have happened with this fandom have been great. But yeah, I mean, seeing it from someone from a very different perspective of me was really, really interesting. And all the stuff that you guys that you put out has been really fascinating, really fun.
Thank you.
Significantly higher quality than the stuff that I put out here. So if you want something that looks like people actually put effort into it, check out his stuff.
Well, I mean, contrarily, while we're throwing compliments, I will say that your knowledge of the game side and game mastery is pretty unparred compared to other channels I've watched. So if you are new to Jody's channel, definitely dive into the library.
Anyway, that again is going to be all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.